Alright, so in this quick video we're just going to talk about terms, expressions and equations. Now an expression and an equation are very easy. Basically if you have an equal sign you have an equation, and if you haven't got an equal sign in algebra it's what's called an expression. So typically you might have something that looks maybe like this. You might have, for example, 2x equals 3. Something like that is an equation, because it has an equal sign in between two things. But if you were to look at the two sides of that equation, so the part that's 2x or the part that's 3, so the left side or the right side, without the equal sign, these two things are both expressions. They don't have an equal sign. So what an equation is really is showing that two expressions equal one another. So that's equations and expressions. The other thing you might see are things called terms. Now terms are basically all the bits and pieces that you have in an equation or an expression that are connected by addition or subtraction. Alright, so if we look at something, for example, like another example, we'll just do, say we had 2x plus 1 equals 3a minus 2. Okay, when I say all the bits and pieces in an equation or expression, I'm looking at these bits that are in between additions or subtractions. And we also include the sign that's in front of the pieces. So like that piece there, there's an addition with this 1, so that's another piece. We don't worry about the equal sign. This is another piece, and then there's a takeaway too. I'm going to take the sign as well with it. All right. All of these parts here are what we call terms. Alright, so in this case, the terms that we have would be 2x plus 1, 3a, and negative 2. They're all the things that I've circled. Now, if you want to, because you've done positive and negative numbers, you know that you don't really need to write a plus in front of stuff. So to make that a little bit simpler, you could just get rid of the plus in front of the 1 and make it a 1. So the terms in this equation, because it has an equal sign, these parts that I've circled, make sure that when you circle things you always circle the sign in front if there's any signs. When I say signs I mean operations like plus or minus, and then you just write them out in a list. So there's an example over here on the left. If you work through and you think you're okay, you can fast forward to the next little section, but I'm going to go through this example. So this is worked example number 3. So what we're looking at is we've got an equation, because we've got 3p plus 4q minus 8pq equals 7 plus 2r. Now remember that when you have letters and numbers all together, like next to each other, it basically means that they're multiplying. So this 8pq is 8 times p times q, like that. We just don't worry about writing in the multiplies. So we've got 5 things that we need to look at here. The first one is to look at whether or not this is an equation or an expression. Now you can see there's an equal sign here, so state whether this is an equation or an expression. Well, it's an equation because it has an equal sign. Equal sign. Alright, the next one, we've done that. B, it says identify the coefficient of PQ. So what we need to do is look at our equation here, identify the PQ part. So you can see here that in our equation PQ is here. And when we look for the coefficient is the number in front, and it includes the sign as well. So the coefficient of PQ is the whole number and the sign that's in front of it. So the coefficient of PQ is negative 8. The next part of this question, tick, it says C, list all the variables. Now variables are all the letters that you're using in your equation. So when we talk about letters, basically you just think about the alphabet and what you have in there. So if we have a look, I'll just circle them in green. We've got P. Now there's a P here as well. Okay, that's multiplying a Q. So I can write down P because that's there as well. I've also got a Q, and that's a Q, so I don't have to write it again, and an R. So we've got 3 variables in this equation, P, Q and R, 3 letters that turn up in the problem. The next part is D. It says write any constants. Now constants are the sad, lonely numbers that have no letters with them. So in this equation, we actually have, if we have a look, we've got, that's got a letter, that's got a letter, that's got a letter. That 7, that little sad 7 does not have a letter with it. So that is our constant. It's a number that's on its own. So the number 7 is a constant. And you can have more than one constant in an equation. It just so happens here that we have only the one. And the last part of this question, part E, it's asking us to list all the terms. Now remember that the terms are the parts in an equation that are added or subtracted. And if we have any parts that have an addition or a subtraction in front, we have to make sure we include that part. So I'm going to circle the terms now. I'll circle the terms in red. So we've got 3p, and I'm going to write them down in a list too. So these are what we'd say are our terms, and make it a list. So 3p, comma, the next part is the plus 4p. The next part, remember that every time you have an add or subtract, that's when it's a term. So the next one is negative 8, oops, pq. You don't worry about the equal sign. There's a 7. And the last term is plus 2r. So those are all our terms. All the parts that are separated by plus and minus signs are our terms. And remember that if you like, instead of having to write the plus in front, you can get rid of that. So you don't really need it. So our terms really are the 3p, the 4, oh, I've just realised that's a p. Should be a q. Excuse me. There we go. The 3p, the 4q, the negative 8pq, the 7 and the 2r. Those are all our terms in this equation. So the last part of this lesson is just looking at, and you might really like to pause the video there if you're copying those things down, make sure you've got them in your book. The second example here, we're going to look at a situation where we need to identify variables and then write an equation. So we've got the first part here, we've got the question. So it says a farmer has a number of sheep X and a number of ducks Y in a paddock. There are 5 times as many sheep as there are ducks. So this is really the part here that I've underlined that we have to turn into an equation. Now remember that an equation is something with an equal sign. So first part of the question says identify the variables. So the variables are the parts that we're interested in here, so the actual items or objects or things that change. So here it's the number of sheep and the number of ducks. So our variables are the number of sheep and the number of ducks. Now part B, so that's part A done. Part B says define each variable using the pronumerals that are given. So in this case it's really easy because they've actually already told us what letters to use. So that means that we can very easily just literally copy this, drag it over. So we know that the number of sheep in this case is represented by the pronumeral X, and the pronumeral Y represents the number of ducks. So that's part B. Part C says to write an equation that represents this situation. So it says here there are 5 times as many sheep as ducks. 5 times as many sheep as ducks. So imagine in your head you had 5 ducks. If you had 5 ducks, it says there are 5 times as many sheep. So that means that if you had 5 ducks, you should have 5 times as many sheep, which is 25 sheep. So to do that, now what we can think about is, well, okay, the number of ducks to the number of sheep. If we have 25 sheep in this case, oops, I shouldn't put the word sheep here. 25 sheep, the number of animals, we have 5 times as many ducks. Okay, so what we've got is we've got our number of sheep. So this is our sheep, and this part here would be our ducks. So we can replace the sheep with an X to represent sheep and a Y to represent the number of ducks. So now we can try this again. So I'll try it up the top here. So let's say that we had, let's say we had 1 duck. How many sheep should we have? If we have 1 duck, we should have 5 times as many sheep, so we should have 5 sheep. So let's check that. X equals 5 times Y. X is the number of sheep. 5 times the number of ducks, which here is 1 duck, that's 5. So that makes sense. So this rule is correct. If you want to simplify this rule, I'm just putting a little arrow to say you could simplify it. It would be the same as x equals 5y. And the reason for that is, remember that in algebra you don't need to worry about writing multiplication signs, but you do have to write down addition and subtraction and division signs. So that's how we turn a sentence into an equation. So make sure you write down in summary these 2 points in your book, what an algebraic equation and expression are. An equation has an equal sign, an expression has not got an equal sign, and an algebraic expression may be made up of terms. Remember, those are the parts that are separated by addition and subtractions, taking into account the negatives or subtractions if you're writing down those terms.